Welcome to MojoPlays, and today we're ranking every Final Fantasy protagonist. For this list, we'll be going over every lead character for the canonical entries in the Final Fantasy franchise. This means we'll be omitting 11 and 14 due to their open world online structure, as well as skipping spin-off titles like Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. Just the big ones here, folks. Who's your favorite leading man or lady from Final Fantasy? Let us know in the comments.
Before we begin, we publish new content all week long, so be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.
Warriors of Light, Final Fantasy. They say that every epic journey begins with a single step, and for Final Fantasy, this goes all the way back to 1987 and the Warriors of Light. Although the theme of chosen warriors harkens back to the monomyth of the hero's journey popularized by Joseph Campbell, it also permeates the Final Fantasy mythos. Despite this, there's little to chew on emotionally from this first game, at least compared to the grandiose stories told by later entries. The Warriors of Light may represent the players, but we actually much prefer it when the games take us on their own hero's journey. Noctis Lucis Caelum, Final Fantasy 15.
Your Majesty as well. Try to mind yours around our esteemed guests from Niflheim.
You have no cause for concern.
Nor do you.
Has the bloom fallen off the rose when it comes to the more recent entries in the Final Fantasy franchise? Some might say yes, especially if we're discussing the quality of recent protagonists such as Noctis. Don't get us wrong, we do admire the fact that this pretty boy, despite being royalty, is loyal and non-judgmental to those he loves. However, his general disinterest and sullen behavior leaves us cold, despite his backstory fleshing out this attitude as the journey went on. Maybe Noctis just has a lot of competition, but we just think there are better leads out there.
Well, what can I say?
Luneth, Final Fantasy III. Luneth is a great example of how Final Fantasy expanded on their Warriors of Light mythos, just as they were becoming more adept at telling their own stories. This courageous and headstrong warrior exemplifies the impulsiveness of youth and thus makes a perfect avatar, going from innocence to experience. Luneth develops strong leadership qualities throughout his story arc, taking his naturally extroverted nature and tempering it with wisdom, moral strength, and tenacity. It's just a shame this Final Fantasy entry was initially only released in Japan, as it would have brought Luneth to a wider audience that would have likely appreciated his story. Firion, Final Fantasy II. Another entry that was only available in Japan at first, until it was ported over to the Game Boy Advance in 2004. This is a shame, because the introduction of Firion was rather unique at the time, since he was the first named protagonist for the franchise with his own storyline. Sure, he's not as fully fleshed out when compared to those that would come later, but Firion's motivations of justice and revenge are easy to understand. Additionally, Firion is presented as imperfect, with personality flaws that directly affect the plot, such as his weakness for a pretty face. Overall, it's an early example of where Final Fantasy was headed. Bartz Klauser, Final Fantasy V. It's a sad reality that characters like Bart's Clouser didn't receive the exposure they deserved until their games were ported over years after their initial release. That said, there's also a reason why Bart's is comparatively higher up compared to his contemporaries, and it's thanks mainly to how much he matures during his journey. He's a lone wolf, a drifter with no real direction, until certain events nurture his growth as a leader and team player. His fear of heights relates to a backstory that's revealed to us piece by piece, just as our affection for Bart's grows as he's tested by the game's ever-rising stakes. Zidane Tribal, Final Fantasy IX. The decision to go back to grassroots with this entry was a bold one, particularly given how the previous two installments felt so comparatively adult in their execution. The journey of Zidane Tribal and friends is much more colorful, and often represented with a dose of humor, although their story certainly has its share of darkness. Still, Final Fantasy IX is so full of heart, and Zidane himself practically bursts with life. He's a thief by trade and a sucker for the ladies, but loyal and brave to a fault. Beyond this, his bold personality was a breath of fresh air for those who just might have been a little tired of the moping by other more famous Final Fantasy protagonists. Vaughn, Final Fantasy XII.
I got the writ of transit right here. You see? Signed, Magello. I just hate to see the consul upset because his food wasn't ready on time. And I sure hate to see him take it out on you.
Picking a central protagonist from this game is a difficult task, as the developers themselves have gone on record stating that the game is about numerous people, not just one person. Still, we're going to go with Vaughn here, despite Balthier so often referring to himself as the leading man.
Well, I'd do something.
Vaughn's big dreams and humble origins make him easily identifiable, serving as the eyes from which we view 12's sprawling story. He's also, depending on the artist's rendering, quite a bit of a fashion plate, rocking the vest no shirt combo with no shame. You go, Vaughn.
Me? What am I looking for? I guess... Well, you know...
Tidus, Final Fantasy X.
If I score a goal, I'll, do this. That will mean it was for you, okay?
There's no shortage of memorable characters here, such as Yuna, who took center stage in the direct sequel 10-2. As for Tidus, he's a big, dumb jock, but we love him for it. The Lug is a blitzball star stuck in a strange land, forced into the world of Spira, which requires him to grow up, and quickly.
I thought about a lot of things. Like where I was, what I got myself into.
As a result, his already brave and selfless nature is amplified as he grows into his new role, with his flaws of naivety and impulsiveness eventually tempered thanks to the influence of his new friends. The less said about his laugh, however, the better. Claire Farron, aka Lightning, Final Fantasy XIII.
Tell a soldier to kill an enemy, and you really think it's gonna matter what uniform he's wearing?
Might have mattered to that one. Couldn't shoot. Got himself shot instead.
It was refreshing that the franchise was still able to knock it out of the park with a new, iconic character so late in the game. Lightning was absolutely an instant classic when she debuted, despite being ice cold. It actually takes almost the entire game for Lightning and Claire Farron to become one, a fully fledged hero that is not only a fearsome warrior, but a trusted friend, leader, and hero. Her relationship with her sister Sarah, herself a protagonist for the sequel 13-2, is also crucial to defining lightning as a major modern part of the Final Fantasy universe.
You crossed the void and made it to Valhalla. You can find Sarah. And together you can change the future.
Squall Leonhardt, Final Fantasy VIII. Does the man mope a lot? Why, yes. Yes, he does. Still, we can't help but admire Squall for his undeniable intelligence. His initially hard demeanor softens in a fashion that's similar to other Final Fantasy heroes, but his execution is a bit different, as we're given a lot of guidance as to his thought process and inner struggles. Beyond this, his excellence as a fighter, leader, and tactician is beyond reproach, growing into one of the most well-rounded and compelling characters the series has offered up. Terra Branford, Final Fantasy VI. The ability for players to mix and match party members in this game made it challenging to pick a proper protagonist. We could have easily gone with Locke Cole, but in the end we just had to give the honor to Terra Branford. The tragic nature of her amnesia combined with the very realistic fear and confusion makes her instantly identifiable. We're eager to follow her story to the end, while her strength as a magic user makes her an essential party member. Final Fantasy VI is almost always in the conversation when it comes to the very best entries in the franchise, and Terra is a huge reason for that. Cecil Harvey, Final Fantasy IV. The story of Cecil Harvey and Kane Highwind was a huge deal for North American players, as it was the first Final Fantasy to be ported over to the SNES after the original game's success. To jump from the OG's basic execution to this sequel's comparatively sprawling story was nothing short of a revelation. Players now had a protagonist whose motivations we could really get behind, since Cecil was supposed to be a brave knight, yet he struggled with the insecurity and fear, while his relationship with childhood friend Kane ebbed and flowed. It felt like the best sort of soap opera, with the best sort of hero. Cloud Strife, Final Fantasy VII. There's probably no other Final Fantasy protagonist that better connects the spirit of the franchise with the spirits of the players. There's just an emotional connection to Cloud that transcends. For many, this soldier is the poster boy, from his battles with Sephiroth to his iconic weapon. The emotional beats of his struggle have been touched on with other characters, such as his growth from being reserved to open and extroverted. However, Cloud's inner demons, his self-doubt and guilt, are actualized to the point that they transcend Final Fantasy VII and frankly enter the gaming zeitgeist as a whole. He is an all-time classic.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, there's more where that came from.